There's an analyst who's brilliant. I read his stuff all the time. I'm like, man, you're so smart. And I just really follow him very, very closely and give him a lot of credit. But he said, you can't have a currency union without a common fiscal policy. And I said, have you not heard of the euro? And there is no common fiscal policy in Europe. Don't tell me that Italy has the same fiscal policy as the Netherlands or that Germany has the same fiscal policy as Greece. They don't. They do have a central bank that issues the currency, has a little bit of gold, but not a lot of relative to the size of the economy. But there's no common fiscal policy, and there's no common bond market to this day. There's no such thing as a bond or cool euro bond backed by the full faith and credit of the entire European monetary. So it doesn't exist. You can buy German bonds in euros, you can buy Italian bonds in euros, but you can't buy a euro bond backed by all those countries. So they don't have a common bond market. They don't have a common fiscal policy. But they do have a currency union that's very successful. So now back to the BRICS, they finally have the scale. They finally solve this problem, which I described when you get to countries. You're not too much further ahead than barter. But with 30 countries or 40 countries, you've solved that problem. That's the background and 17 years in the making. It's not an overnight thing. They replicated the World Bank, they replicated the IMF, now they're coming up with a new currency. Now here's where it gets really interesting. And I tell people, if you want to understand this, you have to stop thinking like an American, you have to start thinking like a Russian. It took me a long time to figure this out. This is the kind of thing that pretty much only Russia could come up with. What is the BRIC? And by the way, I don't know if they're going to call it a BRIC. I'm saying BRIC for convenience. Doesn't matter what they call it, but I just call it a BRIC. For the time being, we'll come up with a name. Who knows? The value of the BRIC is not determined with reference to any other currency. It's determined with reference to gold by weight of gold. It's math, it's logic. And now we're back to Aristotle's transitive law. This is the key, this unlocks the whole thing. Aristotle said, if A equals B equals C, then A equals C. The B can drop out its logic called the transit ride. What the BRICS had done is they have dodged the biggest bullet. The thing that causes Britain was ultimately to fail the thing that potentially stands in the way of all this. They have defined their currency by weight of gold. Now, a weight of gold has $1 value, but it's not fixed because the price of gold is going to fluctuate daily, minute by minute, right? So what's going to happen is the whole huge gold market in dollars is still going to exist. In fact, the Brits want it to exist. I've never seen an international monetary economic problem that has created more confusion. I won't say misinformation in this little trick, but just confusion or maybe deliberate hyperbole than this, because this is not the petro yuan. This is not the petro ruble. This is not a gold-backed yuan. This is not a gold standard. This is not the end of the US dollar. It's not the end of the euro. It's not the end of the world. It's not any of those things, but that's what everyone's running around shouting. It's none of those things. In fact, quite the opposite. And it's the Russian mentality comes in, the BRICS, want the dollar to be around. They want the dollar gold market to exist because they get to free ride. The dollar has to do all the dirty work in the gold space, and BRICS get a free ride by declaring one break equal to a weight of gold again. Weight's the key. They slip the dollar gold market go wherever it goes, and the BRIC is worth an answer, whatever kilo, whatever. Yeah, the dollar equivalent under the trends of law changes, but they're not pegged to the dollar. They're not fighting that fight. I analogize. It's like you're in your house in the backyard. Your landscaper is like digging trenches and putting in plants and sweating and doing all this work. And you're sitting there with a glass of iced tea, enjoying the view. In other words, the BRICS gets a free ride on the dollar gold system, and they want that system. They don't want it to go away because they get the benefit of a gold value. Now think about the BRICS don't have to do in the scenario. They don't have to buy gold, don't even have to own gold. They do, but no one in the world has enough called the back of currency. This currency, the BRIC, will not be redeemable into gold, and maybe there's a dealer somewhere and we'll take it. That's between you and the dealer. But it's not like you're going to be able to march down to the People's Bank of China with a pile of bricks and say, give me the gold. They're not going to do it. So it's not redeemable, but they're not going to make a market. They're not going to maintain the value because they don't have to, because it's by weight. They just get to sit back and piggyback on the dollar gold system, let the dollar do all the dirty work with one twist. And here's the Russian contribution. This is the ultimate fiat currency where failing Latin means I say so. Well, they say so when they were just basically, this is a bet. This is a bet that the dollar is going to collapse against over time. I think that's a very good bet. This is not a 3-month forecast. I'm not saying gold's going to go up or down the next week. Who knows? But over time, now we're into what debt to GDP ratios, I know deficits, the RSA, modern monetary theory, all these ideas are ruining the dollar, and everyone can see it, but not yet. And so if you want to watch this new currency and you say long term, the dollar is going to collapse in terms of gold, I'll hook my words to this wagon called gold by weight, and I'll just read the benefits. And I don't have to do a thing. Here's the twist I like, and this is how it's going to play out. Now you're the United States. You're like, oh, looks like I've been painted into a corner. What can I do? Well, one of the things you could do, I've told the Treasury this for years and I'll listen. I mean, they invite me to help listen. One of the things you could do is buy gold. But what happens when the United States buys gold? The dollar price of gold goes up and the brick gets stronger and the dollar gets weaker. Checkmate. In other words, the US is now in a box where you can't even get out of it by buying gold because you're going to weaken your own currency relative to gold in the process. And the BRICS are just going to sit there, not lift a finger. It's genius. I got to credit the Russians. I'm not saying the Chinese couldn't think of something like this, but this is what Russia has fingerprints all over it. People have been talking about this for 20 years, the great reset, the end of the dollar, or the collapse of the dollar gold to the moon, and it's never played out. The dollar has these huge embedded advantages in the form of its reserve currency status, not because everyone loves the dollar or they even love the United States, but because we have the only market big enough to absorb global savings. The US Treasury market is huge. It is liquid, but it's got a whole infrastructure of primary dealers that bid at auction when issued trading settlement clearance futures hedging options, hedging positive trade trust corporation settlement on and on and on. It's got this huge infrastructure of laws, rules, and regulations that they've been building for a long time. But above all, it has the rule of law that people just trusted died, like the dollar. Don't have to like the United States, but you trust the market. The US, in response to the war, broke the trust. They froze US Treasury assets of the Central Bank of Russia, unprecedented on sanctions. Extra work for the intelligence community was part of what I did, was look at sanctions and a lot else. And as far as I'm concerned, I know that our BRICS friends agree that's the default. Maybe Sam P would call it a selective default. But Russia made the money, they bought the treasuries, they're entitled to principal and interest, and we're saying, no, you can't have the principal, and it's just, we're not paying you. Well, that's the default. I don't care how Janet Yellen must dress it up. And it was a shock, but...
So, to wrap things up, the BRICS nations are creating a unique and innovative solution to bypass the limitations of bilateral trade and currency issues. By anchoring their new currency, which I refer to as the BRIC, to the weight of gold rather than the value of any existing currency, they've ingeniously sidestepped the pitfalls that plagued previous attempts at establishing alternative financial systems. This isn't about the end of the dollar or the euro, rather, it's about creating a more stable and flexible system that allows for smoother international trade among a large coalition of countries. The brilliance of this system lies in its simplicity and strategic foresight. By leveraging the existing dollar-gold market, the BRICS can benefit from a gold-backed value without the complexities of gold redemption or maintaining massive gold reserves. This approach also effectively neutralizes the potential adverse effects of US moves in the gold market, creating a scenario where the BRICS nations can prosper without significant intervention.